Our memories are probably the hardest things to trust. Or perhaps, I should say, my memory is. How can I ever truly know what you remember outside of you telling me? You could tell me what you recall from the first time you learned how to ride a bike, but you're only creating a description in my mind of that experience, regardless of how in-depth your description is. I'll never know how many times you pedaled, how hard you gripped the handlebars, how tight your knee pads were. And it's likely you won't either because those details aren't important to the overall experience. All you're doing when you relay your experience to me is creating a new memory that both of us inherit. My memory of imagining this story you've told, and your memory of relaying this story to me. Our minds contain a repository of memories, which are just experiences which degrade in accuracy over time as we inch closer to expiration. With that said, I'd like to share a memory. I don't know exactly how old I was, but I was certainly a young boy when my father asked me one of the most famous philosophical questions. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? I don't remember what my answer was. My father was always challenging me with difficult questions, and he, despite his faults, inculcated within me the qualities needed to have a critical mind, I think. So does it? Hypothetically, this has happened countless times since trees came into existence. For millions of years, trees were on Earth before humans. Untold numbers of trees rose and fell without a soul near to hear the crash. Even more, it could be happening right now in some dense, remote forest somewhere on Earth where no person is close enough to catch the trunk's crack. Well, first, to answer this question, we first need to define sound. What is it? According to Google Dictionary, they are vibrations that travel through the air or another medium and can be heard when they reach a person's or animal's ear. I noticed that the definition uses the conjunction and not that, as a relative pronoun, meaning that the vibrations do not necessarily have to be transmitted to any receiver. Also, the use of the word quote-unquote can implies that sound reception is not mandatory for sound to exist as well. Okay, well that settles it, right? Wait, dictionary.com's definition of sound is the sensation produced by stimulation of the organs of hearing by vibrations transmitted through the air or other medium. Okay, now there's a contradictory point of view. In this definition, sound only truly exists once auditory receptors register the vibrations. I'm sure if I continue to consult other sources, the definitions would continue to lack consensus. There's no need to bring ChatGPT into this to muddy the waters more. So how can we reason what would happen if this unobserved tree fell? Well, I think the best way is to come to some agreement about what reality is. An argument could be made that the tree doesn't make a sound because sound, as a concept itself, is a human invention, an idea that humans have invented to explain or describe a phenomenon that occurs in the universe. You could argue that all things are merely ideas that we've created. Even the words I'm using now to express myself. They're only real because we have agreed on what the word tree means in the English language, for example. You could even go a step further and say that the actual tree only exists because it is able to be observed by some sentient observer. And if there were no sentient observer, there wouldn't be or couldn't be any actual proof that that entity exists because all known reality is built on evidential principles. I'm not a trained or professional philosopher, but I'm sure there's a name for this perspective. Positing that, one could answer the question that if the tree falls and no one is there, does it make a sound? With no, of course not, because the tree wouldn't even be there. Side note, this question requires that there are no animals, insects, or other sentient organisms nearby that would react to this crash. Back to the topic, I do see a lot of merit in this sentient-centric point of view. I find it hard to argue against anything outside of my own observable reality existing on its own, because just like the memories you tried to tell me about your first bike ride, my only knowledge of this experience is just a mental recreation I've made based on words that I've heard you say, not a true experience or observation. But in how people actually operate, we do place value and trust in others' testimonies about reality, even if we don't observe them directly. That's why witnesses are called to the stand in criminal cases. We read autobiographies of important people, or we listen to opinionated podcasts. Also, the ability to compose and contemplate hypotheticals is probably the greatest invention of language or evolutionary biology, however you look at it. So, imagined realities also hold their own weight. They are real in the sense that the thoughts, once introduced, allow us to think about possible different scenarios in the universe. So I think it is best to divide and define reality in three distinct categories. The first type of reality I will call true observed reality. This is the world that only I see, hear, feel, smell, think, and exist in and with. I call this true observed reality because I do believe that I can trust my senses. My feelings of physical pain are very real to me. The desire for self-preservation is very real to me. And the forces that act upon me, like the wind blowing through my hair, is very real to me. You might find the last example funny or peculiar on account of me being bald. But believe it or not, I once had shoulder-length dreadlocks that would sway slightly in the breeze. This is a memory I can trust with some certainty because I directly observed it, in this case, by feeling it in the first person. Had I been born with alopecia or some other medical condition which disallowed me from growing hair, that example would fall into the next category of reality I'll introduce. Presumed reality. Going through life thinking that my perception of reality was the only valid one, while everyone else around me were non-playable characters in my own self-centered video game, would be an error. While on one hand, it is true that only what I directly observe can be verified as actually existing, there are billions of other observers who verify their existence and their interactions with the forces around them in the universe as well. If I were sunbathing on the beach on a bright sunny day, and then I began to sweat, and then I stood up and looked around at others on the beach with beads of perspiration on their bodies, I have to presume that the true observed reality that I'm experiencing is at the very least a true reality for those I'm observing. This presumptuous form of reality also explains phenomenon that happened before my true observed reality came into existence. When I look upon a great monument such as the pyramids of Giza or the Eiffel Tower, logic tells me that these structures were erected by people who once walked the earth like I did, and their remnants, in this case, great architectural structures, verified they once existed, allowing me to presume that they had a true reality they lived in similar to mine. While leaving behind artifacts or progeny isn't necessary to verify the lives of billions of previous people, seeing as how my DNA alone bolsters the fact that I come from a long ancestral lineage, it further supports the premise that my true observed reality didn't spawn in a vacuum, and I can presume others' reality is true to them, and I should interact with them accordingly. The third type of reality I'll introduce is hypothetical reality. Similar to memories, hypotheticals exist in the mind and can be produced independently or introduced by other minds, presumed reality, interacting with mine, through conversation, reading, listening, debating, etc. Hypothetical reality is a true reality only in the sense that it is as real as our thoughts, memories, and dreams. I argue that anything that the mind contemplates or creates is as a part of reality as any form of matter twisted by the hands of man. Because our thoughts are able to be spoken, written, distributed, and clearly defined against other things. Me writing my ideas now, even though I'm using physical items like a pen and paper, is me transferring something abstract into the world, a clear point of view, a philosophical argument. Thoughts are real things even if they have to be transmuted into a physical medium such as language, podcasts, books, or film. No one is going to confuse a thought experiment with a blender. No one would say natural gas isn't real because you can't see it and it has to go through a long process of liquefaction before it can be barreled, then shipped, then used. So we must view thoughts the same, especially hypotheticals. Therefore, hypotheticals exist in reality, but what makes them different than true observed reality and the presumed reality of others is that hypothetical reality is produced by both of the former realities. It has the ability to exist longer in time, meaning it can potentially outlive the existence of the producers of the first two realities. And it is a reality that can defy conventional rules of the universe, society, and logic. Hypothetical questions like what would the universe look like if gravity wasn't around? How would society be different if men were able to be pregnant instead of women? Or how could selling your stocks at a loss make you money? Are all hypothetical realities that exist in the medium they are carried in and in the minds that ponder them. Hypothetical realities are different from memories or dreams because they are not based on experiences directly felt in true observed reality or the presumed reality of others. At least they don't have to be. Hypothetical realities are intentionally created and spread to evolve in the minds of the host that carry them to bring forth something new entirely on purpose. Once again, if you tell me about your first bike ride, you're only giving me material to work with to construct a forever imperfect replica of this memory. The same goes for dreams or what you did yesterday. However, if you were to tell me, hypothetically, there was a speeding train about to crash into a bus full of kids and I had the power to divert it, but would end up killing one person, then you ask me what I do, that's a new reality that I can creatively imagine, mold, and contemplate. I would not lump hypothetical reality with listening to or reading fictional or non-fictional stories because those are only replicas of reality created by another mind's presumed reality. No matter how in-depth I read Tolkien, my imagining of Middle-earth is only an incomplete copy of what Tolkien is trying to convey. So let me go back over my different categories of reality just in case it got too convoluted up to this point, and I promise I will answer the question about the tree. First, there is true observed reality. This is what the self observes and identifies in the world around it. This is called true observed reality because it is the only verifiable reality that we know. An example would be me seeing a tree fall and hearing the noise as it crashes to the ground. The second type of reality is presumed reality. This is the reality that exists outside of the self that one will never know for certain truly exists, but the self presumes that this reality is true because it sees that these other entities verify the self's true observed reality and the other observers' realities. Presumed reality is supported by logic. There are things, people, experiences, and knowledge that have existed or do exist now that my true observed reality cannot access. But there is strong evidence to presume they have or do because many other observers testify on their behalf. An example of presumed reality is someone other than me telling me about a time she was in a forest and heard the sound of a falling tree. Or it could also be logically based. I can presume that a tree makes a sound whenever it falls in reality because noise being made by falling things has been verified not only by my true observed reality, but the presumed reality of other observers. The last type of reality is hypothetical reality. This is reality that only exists in thought. It is created by the minds of the first two realities. This reality needs a medium to be transmitted. This reality can outlive its creators, and knowing who the creators are of these realities is not even important. It is different than other mental productions because it is not an incomplete replica of a dream, memory, or story. It was specifically created to be malleable in the mind. Hypothetical reality can defy all norms and conventions because the answers to hypothetical questions remain largely absent. Though ideally, hypothetical reality should lead us to some form of truth. An example of hypothetical reality would be the question itself. If a tree falls and no observer is there, does it make a sound? Well, hypothetically, no, because the mind can imagine that a universe where no medium to carry a sound wave exists or no creature evolved to have auditory receptors. Side note, upon reflection, I realized that some people might say true observed reality and presumed reality require a medium as well, the observer. I would disagree because a medium is a vehicle or a passage where one entity transmits something to another. I do not believe the minds of the self or others are independent of the bodies of the observers. If that were true, the mind would continue functioning after the death of its host, which, from observation, we know not to be true. So does the singular falling tree in the forest make a sound? Well, here is my opinion. In true observed reality, no, it doesn't or wouldn't because the tree didn't have an observer. It might sound self-centered, but if I didn't see it or I didn't hear it, it didn't exist. In presumed reality, the tree does make a sound because logic would tell us that what happens in front of us would also happen when we are not present. Our speculations about the basic laws of nature and physics tend to be right, especially if we're talking about common things like dealing with gravity, the most pervasive force. And finally, in hypothetical reality, the tree may or may not make a sound because the rules that typically govern the universe could be bent or broken. We could posit there might be a scenario in which the tree exists in a time and space where the ability to receive or generate sound aren't operable. I hope these three answers don't make it seem like I want to have my cake and eat it too, but this is the only way I can express my opinion on this question after deep contemplation. You might be wondering why I take my time to compose these philosophical texts. Surely, at the time I'll be publishing this, you won't have been listening this far because of my philosophical work. Well, as my platform meagerly grows in stature, I believe it is important to demonstrate to my audience my way of reasoning and how I come to conclusions. It is also important for me to write on a wide breadth of topics so as not to be boxed into a category, and also inspire my audience to know and believe that you don't have to be one or two dimensional, but that you can be a person with several layers, interests, and passions. In a world where so many people angle to become thought leaders and where so many others are vaulted to stardom through demagoguery, I believe if you're going to lead or follow anyone, you have to show or know the mind's capacity to reason, use logic, and reflect upon itself. Signing out for our people, Simon Hill.